All right. Welcome to our final keynote of the 42nd Annual Seed Savers Exchange Conference. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Janine Shepard. I'm the Education and Engagement Manager here at Seed Savers Exchange. And I am so excited to introduce you to our final presenters this year, Debra Freeman and Joshua Fitzwater, who goes by Fitz. Deborah is a food writer and host of the critically acclaimed podcast, Setting the Table. And Fitz is an heirloom watermelon expert and founder of Southern Grit magazine. And they are here today to talk about some of their adventures in finding their favorite heirloom watermelons, as well as to give us some tips for how to grow bigger and sweeter heirloom watermelons at home. So Deb and Fitz, thank you so much for being here. We can't wait to hear your story. I will hand it on over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks you guys for having us, and thanks to all of you for tuning in to hear about our Heirloom Hunters adventures. So thanks. I don't know if you have anything before we kind of dive in.
I just wanted to thank SSE for having us. This is a real pleasure for us. Really respect what SSE does, and also thanks to everybody who decided to come in here and basically listen to us to go on and on about heirloom watermelons for about 45 minutes or so. So yeah, I'm just happy to be here, and we'll get started. Just like I think Deb wanted to say one more thing before I started in.
Yep, just that I'm going to share my screen, and we've got some slides for you guys to follow along with. So if you'll give me a second, I'll go ahead and do that. All right. Hopefully everybody can see. Is everybody good? All right.
All right. So in 2019, this lady right here said, we have to move to Richmond. And we both grew up in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia, so the Norfolk, Virginia Beach area of Virginia. And Deb basically got offered a job she couldn't turn down.
That's true.
Said, you must move with me to the mean concrete streets of Richmond. And so we came here, and I wasn't too happy about it, but I realized that we were also in the area close to Hanover, Virginia, and the legendary Hanover tomatoes were here. So I started going to farmers markets and different places, side like areas with stands. I would go on private property and try not to get shot if they had like small little trucks with fruit on them and things. And so I started to kind of look around at what was available in terms of local fruits and vegetables and things like that. And that would have been in about 2018. Mm-hmm. And so at some point, and we differ on this, watermelons came into the mix. So Deb swears it's that she heard the story of the Bradford watermelon on the PBS show Mind of a Chef. I swear that I came across a Moon and Stars yellow flesh at a local market, but somehow or another, heirloom watermelons became this giant obsession. And I found myself going further and further across the state of Virginia looking for these watermelons. And then Deb said, you know what, screw it, we're gonna have to drive down to South Carolina and go experience this Bradford watermelon that everybody is talking about.
So this photo here, we're kind of kicking off because in some ways this is how it started, at least for me. So that's a Bradford watermelon and is strapped safely into our car because the rind is so incredibly delicate that a slight bump will basically break it open. So we just thought it was kind of funny that we named the watermelon. We brought it home with the seatbelt on. You know, it was like our little baby, which is actually gross because we ate it. But at the same time, you know, it was just for us, that was actually a really big moment because we drove like 8 hours to get this bad boy. So
can you go to the next slide?
Sure, absolutely.
So again, the story differs because for her, it begins with the Brad. For me, it begins with the travels around Richmond. And so these types of signs you'll see on the right, like I came across all of these in different areas of Virginia and we pretty much stopped at every one. And I don't know, it kind of took hold of me. I wanted to see and taste things that I had heard of and written about to some degree, but hadn't really like explored myself as much as I probably should have. Go to the next slide for me. And so it was kind of like like a treasure hunt or something. It was like, I don't know, organic Frank Fritz and what's his face from
the American Pickers.
From American Pickers. I
You
just
guys know that show.
found myself looking and looking and looking for these heirlooms. See what it is. Is it just this one here?
Yeah, just that one.
And then it dawned on me also that, you know, we had talked a lot and written about and remembered from a child Silver Queen corn. And even that became an interesting story because everywhere that we went, there was this opposing view if Silver Queen corn even existed or not anymore. People claimed to have it. It was a corn that was really big in Maryland and in Virginia during both of our childhoods. And we basically found out through this kind of experience of going around that if you don't eat Silver Queen corn the day that it comes off, then the Silver Queen corn will go bad by the next day. So these newer hybrid corns, you know, further along nowadays, they can stay a lot longer than Silver Queen can. And so really we narrowed it down to like one place that we believe has Silver Queen corn because of how long they've been growing it and because it goes bad so quick. But a lot of people that claim they have Silver Queen corn, they don't. So our travels for these watermelons literally took us everywhere. So from Maryland, where we heard they had a Georgia rattlesnake, yeah. But it actually turned out not to be a Georgia rattlesnake.
It was a lie. We drove for nothing.
It was a Jubilee. You can see some photos of us in Sumter, South Carolina, where Nat Bradford, the namesake of the family who brought back the Bradford watermelon into prominence in the last few years. We also ended up going to the Pennsylvania Dutch country and actually found watermelons that exploded on us.
Yeah, that was fun. That was fun. We have no idea what type of watermelon it was, but it made a hissing sound and literally exploded on the counter when we got back. So I was like, yeah, we're not eating that. That's a no for me.
We went to Delaware and we found a great grower at One Hawk Homestead who was growing a Iraqi watermelon, the Alibaba watermelon. We found that actually to be one of the more sweet watermelons that we tried. Then we found out about a watermelon that had a big influence both for us really delving into the background of watermelons. Then also we ended up, and I'll get to this a little bit later, growing it ourselves. The ancient Crookneck watermelon. There was a grower that had gotten seeds in upstate Pennsylvania, which is why we had to go through the Dutch country, and he was growing it. And the interesting thing about the Crookneck that we would come to learn is that it was discovered in the 1920s by Art Combe in the Arizona area. He was a plant breeder, and he found these seeds in a cave. And it was this red-seeded watermelon, and there was a lot of conjecture on how old these seeds were that were found in this little small clay vase-like container. And he ended up growing them out, and a lot of them, when they were ripe and they picked them, actually had like hooks on them or crooknecks. Mm-hmm. And there's been some talk about how that might have been a thing where indigenous people actually would use those as almost handles to transport them
on their horses.
Now, this is a very much a thing in flux on whether that's correct or not. I've actually taken them to Nat Bradford to look at because some people also claim it's like a genetic defect in some of them that make the top of the watermelon not develop as it should, which creates the hook. But depends on who you talk to about that.
And we'll go into who Nat Bradford is in a couple of slides as well.
Yeah. And so this might be one of the exploding ones, but this is in
I think it was
Pennsylvania Dutch country, where we were stopping on the side of the road and basically like trying to buy watermelons for anybody that would sell them to us and see what we could find out about the backgrounds of them. This is the watermelon for me that I think really got my interest up and made it kind of an obsession. Heirloom watermelons is we got this from a local farmers market. Some people are pretty familiar nowadays with the Moon and Stars, but not as much the Moon and Stars that's orange fleshed. And this kind of made me start thinking about how diverse the taste and profile of these different watermelons are. I had never tasted a watermelon like this before. Apricot flavors, really sweet, but not in a normal watermelon way, more in like a honeydew kind of fashion. Just a really interesting watermelon that I think for me was what kind of kicked off the interest again for Deb. It is the Bradford, and that was what started it. This is the Alibaba watermelon that we got from Delaware. And an interesting kind of thing about this is that it being an Iraqi watermelon, the actual pattern on the outside rind is very similar to some old Southern watermelons, one particularly the Odell's white, in terms of the markings and the patterns. The photo you see here on the left again is the Alibaba. The one on the right is the Crookneck that we got that a grower in upstate Pennsylvania grew and we were able to get. This is a crosscut of the ancient Crookneck, and you can see the red seeds. I think for me, the interesting thing about this watermelon is that it wasn't the sweetest watermelon I'd ever had, but it was one of the more complex. People talk a lot about wine and things and stuff like that. I don't know about that, but it did not taste like what I associate with a summer watermelon growing up as a kid. Then we realized at some point that there was a major seed place up in Virginia that we hadn't been to, the Southern Exposure Seed Exchange. So we were nice enough to get permission from them to come there and check out some rare watermelons they were trialing. So the Yenny Dunya, the Missouri Heirloom. It was kind of nice being able to try these, not having to go out of state, because at that point, Deb was tired of me driving her.
A lot of oil changes as well.
All across the East Coast. So pretty much this is a good encapsulation of that first year, like what we went and found. And one thing I wanted to really touch on, and I'll let Deb touch on this, is that the Bradford in South Carolina, that goes back to the 1800s and was at one time the premier watermelon of the South. There was another watermelon around at the same time that people don't know as much about, the Odell's white watermelon. And I wanted to let Deb kind of touch on that a bit, because she wrote a bit about it in a few articles.
Yeah, so the Odell's white you'll actually see is in the upper left-hand corner, beside a picture of my hands with the seeds in it. And the Odell's white is such an interesting melon. One, because it's been named a couple of different things. But what's really notable about the Odell's white is that it's the only watermelon that can be attributed to an African-American grower. And, you know, as you might imagine, in the 1800s, that's pretty significant, because, you know, that those sorts of records weren't really kept. So we were really lucky to find this watermelon. And I don't want to step on what Fitz is going to say later, but we were really lucky to find one grower in the entire state of Virginia. I mean, we'll show you that slide in a little bit, but this is just such a historically important watermelon. I should say his name because that's important as well. The enslaved man's name was Harry, and so he was known for cultivating watermelons, but this one we know is directly attributed to him.
Yeah, it was created in 1840s, and it was on William Sumner's plantation, and it gets its name from later on from a grower by the name of Milton Odell, who grew these to giant size. They can reach upwards of 100 pounds if grown correctly. It can be a very large watermelon. And essentially how it got rediscovered, it was sort of lost almost, but there was a grower named Roger Wynn, who was growing it under the name of Stony Mountain watermelon, which it had become known in that particular area of South Carolina as. And David Shields and him and Jim Kibler basically identified this, Jim Kibler and David Shields, after meeting Roger Wynn, that this was in fact the Odell's white watermelon. And we were lucky enough to find one guy in Virginia, go ahead, at Crumptown Farms. This is a bigger photo of the Odell's white. It's a really impressive watermelon, and the seeds of it as well are super they're not defined. There's not much of a ridge. They're very small. It definitely is this very sleek, nondescript white seed that didn't really look like a lot of other seeds that we've come across with watermelons. But we were lucky enough to find a farm, Crumptown Farm, and a grower by the name of Brad Constable, who was growing it in upstate Virginia. On the left, you'll see here David Shields. This is the professor in South Carolina that essentially re-identified the Odell's white as the Stony Mountain. And then the photo on the left is Roger Witt and his family, who's been growing this for, I don't know how long, for probably 50, 60, 70 years or something. And they have a harvest every year, and this is them all enjoying the Odell's white watermelon. Again, Deb wrote extensively about our adventures, and this is just one of the articles in our publication, but she's also written about all of this in Garden Gun and for Gravy Magazine and some other places. Now, for me, one of the highlights of all of this happened the following year, or was it 2 years after that?
2 years
Two
after that.
years after that. We ended up actually growing watermelons the next year. So 2019, we hunted, and then we ended up growing in 2020. And then in 2021, we decided to go hunting again. And one of the things that we had to try was the red and sweet watermelon, which was a watermelon that had also been lost, or it was on the edge of being lost. And an old lady came to a meeting by horticulture.
An elderly person.
Yes, I'm sorry. An elderly woman, very sweet lady, I've been told, I'm sorry, came to a meeting that horticulturalist Carrie Hefner was giving in the West Monroe area of Louisiana. And he had been trying to find 5 watermelons that were originally bred, I should say, at the Calhoun Research Station in Calhoun, Louisiana, and had closed down in 2010, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
And this watermelon was the 5th and final watermelon that place had bred with other watermelons that were all heirloom watermelons. And specifically, one that of note was the Louisiana Queen, which was a very famed watermelon of the past that they created. So we had heard about this watermelon. We had heard that Dr. Hefner was attempting to try and grow this, and he was successful. And we were pretty much, the minute we found out that they had a very small patch of them growing, we got on the phone with him, and I begged and pleaded and was like, can we please come and check out this watermelon? And so we drove, how many hours?
Oh my God. 14 hours, I think it was.
I think it was about 14 hours from Virginia to
it was
West
a
Monroe.
long drive. Lots of Arby's.
we stopped in Jackson, I believe, to sleep.
We did. Yeah, somewhere in Mississippi.
Somewhere in Mississippi. We almost got there, couldn't quite. But we met with him, and we met with 2 farms that he was working with who were growing it there. Compton Farms of LA and Indian Village Harvest Farms. And here is the family that we met with, who was actually growing the predecessor to the red and sweet, the Calhoun sweet, which ironically enough, we found not to be as sweet as the red and sweet. We have seeds for both, but we felt that the red and sweet was the one. This is their daughter enjoying the Calhoun sweet when we got down there. This is Dr. Hefner on the left, and on the right is the red and sweet, the one with the stripes, which again is a extremely sweet watermelon. Everything he had said about it was true. Brix counts that average between 12 and 14, which is the way they measure basically sugar in watermelons to see how sweet they are. The photo above that one, I don't know how well you can see it, is the Calhoun Gray, which there is some conjecture that the Odell's white that we mentioned earlier is one of the parent melons they used to potentially breed this Calhoun Gray. So yes, so the red and sweet is seen in the bottom of the right page, and the
Calhoun Sweet.
the Calhoun Gray is seen on the top right. Go to the next one.
All right.
Okay. I'm gonna, if everybody can hear me, I'm just gonna talk with the stuff up there. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Okay. So this is again Kerry Heefner on the left holding one. These are the seeds that he grew out through those few years when after he got gifted that seed from, I have her name, Lulu Shirtlef. I'm probably butchered her name, but yes. And then this is actually him weighing it when we were visiting, and the Calhoun station that essentially was responsible for breeding 5 new watermelons between the years of 1950-ish until 1987, which is when the Red and Sweet, and it was the last one they released, was released. To give you an idea, and this is not Photoshopped, this is just a straight photo, on the right is a crosscut of the Red and Sweet to show you how red that really is. And then its predecessor before, one of the watermelons in its parent line on the left is the Calhoun Sweet, Red and Sweet again on the right. An interesting thing too that I didn't learn until recently about the Red and Sweet is the Red and Sweet, again, seen crosscut on the right. It's only one of 2 watermelons in the United States that is that scarlet red color. And I found out that the grower, whose last name I believe is Johnson, I'm hoping to maybe meet him later this year at the Calhoun station that originally bred this watermelon. The seeds were actually exposed to an X-ray, and they think that might have something to do with the scarlet red. I mean, it is the deepest red heirloom watermelon I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of them. Some of these other photos are the families growing both the Calhoun Sweet and the Red and Sweet in that area of Louisiana. And they also made really amazing Red and Sweet watermelon ice cream that we got to enjoy while we were there. The man on the right is Brad Constable in Farmville, Virginia. He's the one grower in Virginia that was growing the Odell's White that we talked about earlier. It was really an incredible time meeting with him and his family and getting our hands on that watermelon. Earlier, we talked about Nat Bradford. In fact, let me throw this to Deb actually, because this is what kind of kicked it off for her, and she'll kind of tell you a little bit about Nat and the Bradford.
Yeah, so the Bradford watermelon, I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with it, but it was thought to have been lost. You know, as many heirloom, unfortunately, as many heirloom fruits and vegetables can, you know, become lost and extinct. But essentially, Nat Bradford is obviously, you know, the namesake of the watermelon. And so he is, you know, growing watermelons to great success using those seeds. And so he's in Sumter, South Carolina, and you obviously have to go there because, as I mentioned before, the rind is so tender and so fragile that, you know, the slightest bump will break it open. And so that's kind of how it went out of favor, actually, because it couldn't be transported and therefore it couldn't be a commercial venture. But such a nice guy, and honestly, it was well worth the trip to meet him. He was so lovely, and the Bradford really is a great watermelon.
This is just us with that and getting to know him. He's actually holding one of the Crooknecks that we grew and brought to him so that he could kind of give us his take on this, because it's such a debated thing whether that's a genetic defect or it's supposed to be that way. So I should say that we figured in 2020, after that 2019 year, that we had to go ahead and venture into growing ourselves. And so we were lucky enough to get some land in near the Fredericksburg area of Virginia, in Stanton, Virginia. And it was actually indigenous land, the Patawomack Indians. We were able to actually get a plot of land from them. They were very interested in the fact that we were going to grow the indigenous Crookneck ourselves. And we were actually able to get a hold of some of the seed that favors the hooks or the crooks, however you want to say it, the turn at the top of the watermelon. And so we ended up doing a big grow of those, and then a intentional cross, because one of the passions that we've gotten into is we really wanted to create a Virginia bred watermelon. So we started doing experiments of crossing watermelons on purpose, and we actually crossed the Crookneck with the Moon and Stars orange flesh that I mentioned before, and ended up getting a extremely interesting watermelon from that. And then we also did another thing in another area where we crossed the Alibaba and the Crookneck, and ended up actually finding out that that tasted even better than the other intentional cross. So we saved seeds and we dubbed it the double A suite for Alibaba and ancient Crookneck. I basically drove about an hour every day and hand watered these watermelons. And why don't you see if we can bring ourselves up while we're talking about this now and see if it'll work?
I'm not sure if I can.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. So we're gonna try to get our screen back up, which I think we can, because I want to talk about some growing techniques that we learned from Nat, from Brad, and then our own endeavors into this. So just give us 1 second. We're going to try to bring ourselves back up. All right. So we really talked to a lot of people about this, and we wanted to have the best possible success. And we ended up having a huge success that year. So we ended up harvesting probably about 130-ish.
That's about right. Yeah.
Heirloom watermelons that were averaging between, I'd say on the low end, 20 pounds, and then we had some that were in the 40s. And so I wanted to just talk a minute about, some tips that we found that were very helpful. And some of these were also advice and things given to me from Nat Bradford, who basically is one of the premier heirloom watermelon growers today, and Brad Constable, who has grown a myriad of them. So a lot of people know, of course, you want to grow out of mounds. But we found, and Brad is into this as well, I believe, that before creating the mound, we actually dug down a little bit when we were basically trying to amend our soil. We did that so that as the watermelon root came down and spread, it was still hitting that amended soil. So we found that our amendments that worked the best for us, now that we've grown for 2 different years and gotten pretty good results, is we did a mix of mushroom compost, manure, bone meal, blood meal, worm castings, and then we just used a all natural seaweed extract liquid fertilizer at times to help with things. But the main thing that we kind of swear by is that before creating the mound, we actually dig down a little bit and put our amenities in there, and then create the mound on top of that. So pretty much the entire time it's working with this amended soil. You want to have 5 to 8 feet between each mound, because these things are going to spread. They're going to completely cover your area. So you really have to have space to do this. Also, I highly recommend getting them in the ground if you're going to transplant, do seedlings and then transplant over, not direct sow into the ground. You definitely want to get them in there before or right as the true leaves start to show a little bit. You don't want to go too much further after that, or they can get too stemmy, they can get too thin, and it won't support the melon. So you don't want to wait too long before you transplant out if you're going to germinate in like a cup, or however you would germinate the seed in the soil first starting out for seedlings. These things love water, so early on you're going to want to hit them with tons and tons of water. The key is that once you have, particularly if you're going for sweet watermelons, once you get to the point where you're going to be harvesting within a week or two. And I'll go into a second. In a second, I'll go into like how to know you're going to be harvesting in a week or two. But when you're about to harvest, you're about a week to 2 weeks out, you want to pretty much completely cut back on water. You don't, the more water then that you have pumping into the melon as it's getting ready to be time to harvest it, the less sweet it's going to be. So much so that when growers, and I've talked to Nat extensively about this, whenever they have a heavy rainfall that happens right before they do a harvest, they actually call those things cotton candy, and it's like a selling technique to basically take away from the fact that those watermelons are not going to be as sweet because they've been exposed to too much water towards the end of the cycle right before they're about to be harvested. So you really want to cut back from water completely when you're about 2 weeks or so, maybe even a little bit more from harvesting. And then that gets to, okay, well, how do you know when to harvest a watermelon? And man, there are tons and tons and tons of things out there about when the right time is to harvest a watermelon. They'll talk to you about yellow spots versus white spots and all sorts of things like that. The spots literally mean nothing. I've grown some of the sweetest watermelons ever that barely had a spot on them. That has more to do with what type of watermelon you're growing. A lot of the really dark green watermelons will end up with yellow spots on them. But when you have like a lighter watermelon, like the Alibaba or the Odell's white, you're not going to have this like yellow spot that you can look for to see if it's ripe. The main thing is you're looking at the tendril. And I'll have to go away for a minute because I got a photo if you go right back to where we were. So praying everybody can see this. On the left, if everybody can see this, is Brad Constable pointing to an Odell's white that is perfect to be picked. And he's doing that because his finger's pointing at the brown tendril that goes right back to where the umbilical and the vine is. It's that little curly Q tendril is the thing that you want to look for. And usually about a week or 2 weeks out, you'll start to see the very top of this tendril. Again, it's the closest one to the umbilical, which is the thing that connects the vine to the watermelon itself. That closest tendril will start to brown, usually at the top of the curlicue, about 2 weeks out. The minute you see that, you want to just completely stop water. You don't want any water hitting these things at all for that last week or so that you're gonna pick it basically. And once the tendril is completely brown all the way to the base, which if you see where his finger is, it's all the way down to the base, it's brown. 95% of the time, that is going to be your sweet watermelon, specifically if you back off of water. And that sign is way better than knocking on it or looking for a certain type of spot on the bottom of it. Now, knocking on it is, I would say, has some value. Nat Bradford uses it. I've knocked on as well. The deeper the thud, if it gets like too deep, it can be over, but you're looking for that deeper thud. Again, the thumping to me is kind of, I don't go by that as much, but some growers do like that as one of the things. But for me, it's all about that tendril. And if you want to get really, really specific about it, once the tendril is completely brown and you're like, okay, I could pull this, you can then take a look at the umbilical, again, the thing that connects the vine to the watermelon. And if you start to see brown spots on the umbilical, that's another sign. It's like, okay, pull it. Now, this is kind of a thing, little trick, I guess. If the curlicue tendril is completely brown, but the umbilical does not have any brown spots on it, you can probably push it a few more days before harvesting it, and it's probably still okay. And that would allow you to back off of water for a few more days as more sugar is pumped into that thing if it's still coming through. Go to the next slide. So this is more adventures of Deb and I. These are when we harvested, and kind of going by this mode of looking for the brownness of the curlicue tendril and looking for any brown spotting on the umbilical leading back to the vine. I always feel like it could be worse. It could be one of those bad hunter people with their dead animals. At least it's like a wholesome watermelon type thing.
You're not holding a dead
No,
fish.
I'm not holding a fish or the photo on the left actually went viral on Twitter. People thought these were the biggest.
They thought they were cucumbers,
cucumbers.
which I don't know how you would think it was a cucumber, but they thought it was some sort of Photoshop, either zucchini or cucumbers. And I was like, nope, those are watermelons.
And the two at the top there with the spots, that is the intentional cross that we did of the Moon and Stars orange flesh with the Crookneck. And it was very interesting watermelon, but I actually think that the Alibaba crossed with the Crookneck was actually the better tasting watermelon. This was the piece in Garden and Gun. That's actually a crosscut on the right of the AA suite, which we saved those seeds and still have those. And little fun fact, so that's essentially an F1 watermelon, which just means like it's the first year of a new cross. You have to go 7 or 8 years of selecting in a row to get a watermelon to set. Or if I were to just regrow out this, there would be a bunch of different types of watermelons coming out because it hasn't been set, and it takes like 7 or 8 years for that to happen. The local paper covered it, which was really nice. That's what's on the right in Virginia-Pilot. My father is like an unsung hero in this endeavor. He grew Bradfords. He really wanted to grow Bradfords, and that got in the local paper. And then there's tons of things that you can do with watermelons. If there's any barbecue people in here and they have offset smokers, one of the more interesting things we found out is that you can actually smoke watermelons and then slice them extremely thin and use them on burgers and barbecue sandwiches the way you would like a pickle.
Or a tomato.
Or I'm sorry, I would say pickle.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, a tomato, like you would a tomato on a burger. We also canned watermelon rinds. We played around with some different recipes to can watermelon rinds. We found that the really thick ancient Crookneck rinds were ideal for this, really tasty that way. And we also partnered with 2 local chefs to make a barbecue hot sauce out of these Crooknecks and a barbecue sauce out of these Crooknecks, so a hot sauce and a barbecue sauce.
So yeah, so that is the end of our slideshow. I'm hoping folks might have some questions, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is fascinating and delicious looking. So if anyone has questions, please feel free to type them in the chat and I can read them off. Or if you want to ask them, go ahead and raise your hand. There's a reaction button at the bottom and you can click raise your hand if you want to ask yourself. But otherwise, go ahead and type it into the chat and I will read it aloud. And there's one already here waiting for us. What is the best regional soil for watermelon growing?
So regionally, Florida, and well, give you a little background. At one point in the 1800s and early 1900s, Florida grew something like 80% of the watermelons in the country. They were a mecca, and a really interesting watermelon came out of there, the Florida Favorite, which we're doing a lot of research on now, and I will not bore everybody about because it gets super deep. But I would say that state-wise, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and then probably Texas being 4th are probably the 3 or 4 best states to grow watermelons, and their industries definitely reflect it. North Carolina is also good, but I would say those are a little bit better. many of the watermelons originally came from Africa, so any type of a very warm climate is ideal. And then obviously the Crookneck, for example, was grown using dry cultivation techniques because a lot of these, grew in very thin, sandy type soil, back in the day. So anywhere that it's super hot and you have a lot of water, you're going to be in good shape. It's harder, obviously, the more north that you get to grow. That's pretty much why the creation of ice box and handheld, smaller, circular watermelons came about, because they needed these shorter season, faster growing watermelons to meet the shorter seasons of the summer, the more north that you got.
Great, thank you. There are a lot of questions about, oops, am I still on there? Okay. About how you smoke a watermelon.
So the guy that did it, that we watched to it, was Bob Roberts. He owns a restaurant in Norfolk, Virginia, Redwood Smoke Shack. And essentially they did it the way they would meat. You have the offset smoking process is where you don't have the watermelon on direct flame. So the smoke rolls over the watermelon. So what he did is I think he did it for like 2 hours or something.
That's about right. Yeah.
Very low and slow process. And he did it obviously without the rind on, I think one time. And then another time he tried doing it with the rind off, right?
Yeah, he did twice.
Yeah. So I will just say that it cut thin. It worked really well on a burger. It was kind of like a sweeter tomato experience or something. It was very good. I wouldn't recommend eating it by itself. It needs to be thin cut and put on a burger, is the way it worked the best. I would more recommend people do like a thing with the rinds, because that definitely.
And jam.
Oh,
don't forget about jam.
That's right. Yes, people sleep on that. All you have to do to make really good jam is just get a lot of watermelon into a on your stove, in a pot or pan, and you just kind of like make sure that the watermelon is. I was literally taking my hands and just mushing it up and putting it in there. Put a little bit of lime, a little bit of clove, and then you just kind of stir it and keep it on like a medium to low heat until it does its jam thing. It kind of. I was playing Michael Jackson's Jam while I was doing it too. It kind of comes together into a jam, and you want it to be like a really thick consistency. And man, putting that on toast or a bagel, it was delicious.
I have a question.
Yes.
Was the red and sweet you found? Because I believe there was some guy who was trying to rebreed a watermelon from its two parent varieties. It may have been that variety they were trying to rebreed. Was that the original version?
Yeah, yes, I think you might, if I'm wrong, correct me, but I know that they're trying right now to rebreed the Florida favorite, which I mentioned, but the red and sweet is absolutely the original seed. It was the Calhoun station run by LSU put that out in '87, and the woman that still had the seed had been growing it, her and her partner, for the entire time, and came to Kerry Hefner's talk. He then got the seed. He actually has the original booklet from the Calhoun station that goes through what it's supposed to look like and the whole thing. Yeah, that's not a rebreeding process. That's the actual original seed.
Thank you. Speaking about breeding, could you describe the process from F1 for the next 7 years? The question is, are you planting the new seeds, recrossing them, or what does that procedure look like?
Okay, so the way I understand it, and I'm still working with Kerry on this, is once you cross, then after you cross, you want then each year after that to grow the seed that you saved and select. the characteristics that you're looking for. So you're selecting for size, if you're looking for something specific with size, any kind of disease resistance, obviously taste, and then you would save those seeds from that watermelon and then grow those out the next year. So your cross only happens that first year, and then you're trying to set the watermelon. But I don't want to act like I'm an expert on this. We've been consulting with Carrie on this. I just know that it takes 7 to 8 years to get them to set, so that you're not getting watermelons that would produce different types. You have to have that 7, 8 years in it to get it to set. The gentleman who just asked that question earlier was a great question, because right now or a few years ago, there was people in Florida that were trying to rebreed the Florida favorite, which we can get into parent lines. I don't think they were using the right parent lines from the research that I've done, but even if, let's say they were taking that first year F1 watermelon and saying that was a Florida favorite, which it absolutely wasn't, because they would, if anybody planted that seed that they saved from that watermelon, the next year they would get multiple different types of watermelon, some that were more like they were claiming the Bradford and the rattlesnake were the parents. So they would get some watermelons that second year that looked more like a rattlesnake and some that looked more like a Bradford. You have to select each year after that cross you do the first year to get it to set, essentially. I hope that explained it.
Excuse me. Yes.
Are there any efforts to look for the original one of that melon that they're trying to rebreed?
I'm sorry, at the end you cut out a little bit. I couldn't hear you, sir.
Are there any efforts to try to look for the original version of that melon they're trying to rebreed?
Yes. So here's the great news about that. The grower in Florida, who I think his name is Will Crum, that crossed the Bradford and the rattlesnake, he has selected, from my understanding, for 7 years. I'm actually hoping to fly to Florida in August.
No driving. I've drawn the line.
Deb's not driving.
I've drawn a line.
I'm actually hoping to fly to Florida to see this, because when they initially claimed it was the Florida favorite, this was like several years, this was like 5 or 6, I don't know how many years ago it was, but it was a while. And so even if the parent lines that he had were wrong, he has essentially created a new watermelon. If in fact he has been selecting for 7 years, because it should be set now. Now the original Florida favorite seed commercially is not available anymore, but through, I don't know, some real begging and pleading, we were able to find out that the original seed for that actually still exists in Griffin, Georgia, through GRIN and the USDA. And we got in touch with the horticulturalist there. I don't have his name in front of me, Dr. I'm never going to remember it. And we basically found a way to convince him to send us, I think he's going to send us 12 or 14 of the original Florida favorite seeds. And it's my understanding that after that article about the Florida favorite, he also sent those seeds to Will Crum, the guy that's been selecting for this new Florida favorite. And so Will also has the original seed as well. My hope is that next year, to go to Louisiana to meet with Carrie again and see if we can try to grow out the Florida favorite original seed we got from GRIN / the USDA. And we might even be able to compare that watermelon with this new Florida favorite Will Crum bred watermelon. That would be next year. So yeah, the original seed, as far as I understand, I have it, and Will Crum has it. And you actually can request it from the GRIN website online. Whether you get it or not, I don't know, because I've heard it's notoriously hard to get seeds sometimes, and you have to show that it's for research purposes, which clearly that's why we want it.
Yeah. Could
So,
you describe how you cross the seeds in the first place?
Yeah, so what I did personally is I grew them, you want to grow them side by side. That's the reason, one of the main things with watermelons is that if you're trying to keep a seed pure, you're supposed to grow it like nearly a half a mile. It's supposed to be a long distance between watermelons because they easily can cross. So we purposely grew them side by side, and then we actually used hand pollinating techniques to take the male flowers from either of them and then rub them essentially and get the pollen to disperse into the female flowers of the other watermelon. So like when we did the AA suite that was featured in Garden and Gun, I would say half of those were hand pollinated, where I would basically take male flowers from say the Alibaba and purposely rub it and get it into the female flowers of the ancient crookneck. And but essentially your bees and your insects, as they go over a male flower from say a crookneck, when they then jump over to the Alibaba, that essentially will cross, that will be part of the crossing process that will essentially, if you are successful to get the watermelon, that will be the cross.
Nice, thank you. I believe this is Denise asking about the mouthfeel. Is that something when you're breeding watermelon, is that a concept that you talk about? This is something I know sweet corn breeders do, and that's referring to like the texture and the crunch. Is that something that you talk about when you're breeding watermelon?
So and Deb might back me up on this, we always feel that mouthfeel feels kind of dirty to say, but it's definitely a thing. For watermelon specifically, I'm somebody that really likes that crisp watermelon. So when you bite into it, it's firm, there's no mush. I find that some of the yellow and orange fleshed watermelons can be a little less firm than some of the red watermelons. So like a very popular watermelon right now is the Orange Glow watermelon, which literally was improved. And one way they improved it, I don't know as much about it, was they tried to make it more firm than the original texture of the Orange Glow. And so it's called the Leilani Sweet Glow now, I think. And I think one of the things, don't quote me on this, but I think one of the things was that they were trying to make it a little more firm, the flesh a little more firm. So yes, absolutely looking for a crisper, firmer mouthfeel, so to speak, as a characteristic I want to breed into my watermelons for sure.
Great. Do you feel that a variety varies according to where you grow it?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the interesting things that I found out researching the Bradford watermelon is I was basically trying to show that I felt the parentage watermelons they were using in that Florida favorite rebreeding were wrong, and that the actual parents were wasn't the Bradford, it was a watermelon called the Pearson. And so I started searching seed catalogs. I'm starting to bore Deb, so sorry. I started searching seed catalogs to see, like in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, could I find catalogs that were offering both the Pearson and the Bradford in the same catalog. So it was like these two melons exist at the same time. They're two separate melons, whereas they were using the Bradford because David Shields has written that the Bradford was also known as the Pearson. And so they were like, well, this is the same watermelon. But in those studies and in all that research, I started to find that there was a Carolina Bradford and a Western Bradford. And they had different listed characteristics in terms of seed color, sweetness levels, even the color of the rind to some degree was listed differently. for the Western Bradford versus what was listed as the Carolina Bradford. So yes, I do think that area can have a change. I mean, somebody that has, say, where the Crookneck is originally grown in the Arizona area, more sandy soil, and is using a like drought approach where their water levels are very, very low, they're going to deal with or get a much sweeter watermelon on average than somebody in, say, South Carolina, where they can get like downpours and the watermelon would be less sweet just due to the rain. So there's things like the difference of soil with like higher red clay levels and things like that. And so, yes, absolutely. I do believe that area can play a part for sure.
Yeah. Speaking of watering, I have a question here asking if you advise fewer deeper waterings or more frequent shallow watering.
I think it depends on the type of watermelon that you're growing. I think some need more than others. That can both be determined by size. I know for me, my results have always been, unless it rains, I want to water every day. Each plant, I want to be watering for at least a minute, close to a minute, maybe more. Definitely once they get bigger, I want to hit them a little bit more than that once a day. And then again, once you get to, okay, I'm going to harvest in about 2 weeks or more, you just really don't want to water at all on that plant. You want that melon to get as little water as possible. And the minute you're like, I think I'm going to harvest this in like 2 weeks, if you can go without water for 2-3 weeks, that's going to help that watermelon get sweeter when you harvest it.
Sure.
So let's see, I don't know if that answered. I don't know deeper or shallow, but I would do them. I did them and continue to say I would water them for at least a minute a piece every day until more towards the end of the process where I completely pull back on water.
Yeah, great. I have a couple more questions for you. This one's, I think, for both of you, I guess. What is the longest distance you've traveled specifically for watermelon?
Louisiana, for sure. By far.
I forget how many miles it was, but it was legit.
About 1,000, probably.
I think it was more than 1,000. I think it was like 1,100. We got to Jackson, Mississippi, and we have been driving for 12 hours, something like that.
So many hours. so many hours. I lost track of time. It was like, the sun just went down and it never came back up again. It was special.
Now, however, that was a one-way thing. How many hours do you think it was from here? Because we drove to upstate Pennsylvania to get that Crookneck and then back. Which was crazy.
That was about an 8.5 hour drive. And we were like, oh, we can make it back. We can get back to Virginia. I don't know what we were thinking. And so at some point we were just like, no, we're going to get back. No, we are not stopping. We are doing this. Absolutely insane. Never again. I've learned my lesson.
I was so delirious coming back from that I forgot what state Gettysburg was in. I thought we were in one state, we were in another, because we knew we were by Gettysburg.
Right.
Gettysburg.
Like, that's in Pennsylvania, sir. That did not happen in Virginia.
So yeah, I was pretty delirious coming back. I mean, Deb though, she can say, you sleep a lot on these trips. Like,
I do. So I don't have to listen to his music. So that's really what happens. That's the trade-off. I'm unconscious.
But yeah, I would say 12 hours straight shot to Jackson, going to Louisiana.
Yeah, we had to stop and then do the next part the next day. Yeah.
And then probably the second biggest one was the one to upstate Pennsylvania, because we came back the same day.
Like idiots. Yes.
Yeah.
I have one more question here. This one is for Deb. The question is, did you ever think that watermelons would be such a significant part of your life?
No. No. I mean, what started off as Oh, this, at least for me, from my perspective, just reading about the Bradford, and I just thought it would be a really cute weekend trip for us to drive down and taste this watermelon. And so I had no idea that it was an obsession. I mean, there was a point where, he would put blankets on the floor and then, gently place the watermelons down. They had to have the ceiling fan on because, the temperature needs to be correct for these things. And it's been insanity for the past like 4 years, but in a good way, because I will say I'm not quite in the weeds with the technical watering and that sort of thing. But I think I've come to appreciate so much what farmers do in growing our food and providing for us, and just have the utmost respect for the work that they do. And secondly, I think that I have begun to think differently about where food comes from, honestly, and started thinking, going to kind of a big box grocery store probably is not the best way to go if we're talking about taste, if we're talking about quality. And I also started thinking, we had this conversation the other day, it's like, why is it, that we can go to a store and pay like, $9 for something? It's more expensive to eat better. And so then I started thinking about how crazy that can be. So it started a bunch of other questions, which I think are good questions to think about and kind of consider. But the short answer is absolutely not. No, I never did.
Deb and I both come from a journalist background. Me publishing and editing my magazine, and then Deb writing for a who's who of magazines and publications across the United States. And I don't think either one of us thought that we would get this in the weeds, but it's been the other thing too, we've met a lot of really wonderful, interesting people, the farmers in particular, that I do just have a completely different respect for than I ever would have if I hadn't grown 135 watermelons. Like, I've seen how hard they work. And also, I forget who it was. Who was the guy that ran for mayor of New York that everybody thought was Bloomberg?
Okay.
Bloomberg made this statement about how, like, you just put something in the dirt and it grows and there's nothing to it. And like, that's not correct at all. I mean, just trying to learn how to breed a watermelon from two heirlooms into like a new watermelon, and how many years that takes. I'm still getting that down with the help of Carrie. And, there's a lot of science and there's a lot of math involved. And I just have a complete different appreciation for farmers. It's a whole different thing.
Well, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure to hear from you both. And thank you all for being here. Anything else you want to leave us with before we sign off for the evening?
I'd like to tell Matthew that if you have any more questions about the thing about the Florida favorite or the red and sweet or anything like that, please feel free to get in touch with us at southerngritmag@gmail.com, or you can find our email on our website, southerngritmagazine.com. I was really happy to get that question about the Florida favorite and the red and sweet. There's a lot of really interesting things going on with breeding right now, specifically with heirlooms and stuff. So feel free to contact us if you want to talk more about that. I know this is a one question kind of thing, and then move on.
Great. Well, thank you so much. There's a lot of love coming through the chat for both of you. So thank you again. And this was recorded, so this will be up on our conference page by the end of next week. We really appreciate your time. Thanks again for sharing it with us.
Thanks for having us.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.